Yo, what's up, guys? Like the title says, I tested the depths of AC Shadows, and this is a non-spoiler review. If you'd rather go into the game blind, I get it. No hard feelings. You can always come back later. But for those of you sticking around, you're probably curious about how the gameplay and mechanics are built in this game, and I'm here to give you my take on it. Quick disclaimer. I'm new to making content, so bear with me. To be clear, I'm all about those older, more rooted AC games. Not a huge fan of the RPG-style AC games. That said, I keep an open mind and still try to enjoy the newer stuff. So going into Shadows, I knew I wasn't exactly the target audience, but I was still invested, especially after that shift back to stealth and parkour. I mean, those were the two main things that made me fall in love with the franchise in the first place. I wanted to throw a big take here, mainly when it comes to the story, but we're focusing on the core gameplay for this video, so let's get into it. Starting with probably my favorite part of the game, the stealth. Yo, I'm honestly hyped to say this, but the best part of Assassin's Creed now is stealth. Like, for real, it hasn't always been like this. Ever since Origins dropped and the series kinda reloaded, stealth was always getting pushed to the back. It was super frustrating for fans like me who signed up to be that cool assassin, sneaking around in a hood, parkouring across rooftops, and silently taking out enemies. The frustration from us AC diehards? That's probably why we got something like Mirage, a game all about stealth. And honestly, it's cool to see the devs really pushing for that stealth vibe again, especially in Shadows. This team, the ones who did Odyssey, clearly heard the feedback and made the stealth systems here way better. Like, I'm bold enough to say stealth in Shadows is even better than in Mirage. It's more layered, more challenging, and honestly makes you think. Now, back in the old-school Assassin's Creed games, stealth was like the thing. But let's be real, it didn't have the depth of games like Dishonored or Metal Gear Solid. I mean, we didn't even have a crouch button until Unity. But what made those OG games stand out was social stealth, hiding in plain sight. It's kinda what defined assassins in this series, right? I mean, besides Hitman, who else does that? But sadly, social stealth got mostly sidelined since AC2, and what we got in games like Valhalla and Mirage wasn't all that great either. But I'm still holding on to the belief that social stealth has a place in Assassin's Creed. So yeah, when we found out it wouldn't be in Shadows, I was kinda bummed. If they nailed it, it would have been like the perfect stealth experience for AC. But I get why the devs chose to focus more on light and shadow-based stealth instead. From a narrative point, it makes sense too, especially with Nawe not being super familiar with that aspect of the Creed. Even without the social stealth though, Shadows has raised the bar for stealth in this franchise. The level design, new features, and even enemy AI are so much better. Oh, and I gotta say, play on expert stealth difficulty. It makes the enemy's sight range way bigger, and they can actually spot you if you're above them or too far out. No more AI that's blind to everything around them. And that makes stealth so much harder, especially early on when you're still building up your skills. You'll need to slow down, use your surroundings to your advantage, and think ahead. And light and shadow are now a huge part of this. Plus, enemies can deny your assassination attempts if they see you and are already on alert. Reminds me of AC1, honestly. I got wrecked when a guard shut down my assassination, totally flexing on me. This also applies to cover-based assassinations. If you're careless, you'll pay for it. But it adds a nice challenge that makes you more mindful of your surroundings. Smoke bombs are still clutch for escaping or taking out a group, but AI's now smarter about them, making smoke bombs feel way more balanced. New NPCs, like servants, are also there to shake things up. If they see you, they'll run off and alert nearby guards. So, gotta be careful or be quick if you want to deal with them before they call for backup. Then there are the Guardians. Big, tough enemies who appear when someone triggers an alarm. They'll make things so much harder if they show up, so you gotta stop that alarm bell ASAP. The castle interiors are perfect for stealth, Lots of light sources to mess with, hiding spots, trap doors, and even creaky floors that make noise as you move. I love how it forces you to think about sound in addition to light. As a fan of Dishonored, it really gave me those vibes. You've got to be mindful of how quickly you crouch or move because noise is a thing now. With smarter AI and more challenges, you really need to get good with light and shadow-based stealth. It's the most important new addition in Shadows. It feels rewarding to master it, and honestly, it's way more useful than social stealth ever was. Now, you don't just hide in shadows, you can also create them by extinguishing light sources. That's a pretty smart twist. And while you can't just fast forward to night anymore, like we could in the past few games, you can still use shadows during the day, especially indoors. It forces you to strategize and not just rely on darkness. Also, the new prone mechanic is a game changer. It's not just about breaking line of sight. It opens up new ways to crawl under stuff or sneak around. Super handy for stealth kills or just bypassing enemies. Now let's talk about cover and double assassinations, both of which are back after being MIA since Syndicate. The cover system is way more consistent now. It snaps you into cover automatically, and when you're in cover, it's clear. Double assassinations are also back, something we haven't seen since AC2, and they feel so satisfying. Each weapon now has its own special assassination. You've got double assassinations with the Tanto and Hidden Blade, rush assassinations with the Kasari Gamma, and more. The Tanto's definitely my go-to since double assassinations are so versatile. Plus, the Hidden Hand ability lets you assassinate without being detected. It's like a cheat code for stealth. Double assassinations work just like old times. You can do them on the ground, mid-air, or even while sprinting. The animations are fire. And if you combo double assassinations with chain assassinations, you might even pull off something close to a triple kill. But chain assassinations are a bit weird. They happen automatically when you're close to a target, but sometimes they don't work as expected. You can't control it, so it can mess up your stealth if it triggers at the wrong time. It's cool when it works, but it's definitely not reliable. As for calling in allies for help, it's kind of like the old Brotherhood system. You can summon individual allies with unique abilities to help you with stealth or combat. They're unlocked through side quests, and it's pretty nostalgic, honestly. Definitely a fun feature that adds some strategy. Assassination damage also works better than in past games. In Origins and Odyssey, it was a bit of a gamble. You couldn't tell if you could assassinate someone until you were right next to them. Now, enemies have health segments, and your assassination damage removes segments. If you remove enough, you get the kill. Much cleaner, no more guessing games. By the end, Nawe's a full-on assassin, able to take down anyone she comes across. It's satisfying to see her skills grow throughout the game. One change I'm not a fan of? The reworked Eagle Vision. Sure, the drone bird is gone, thank goodness, but now you can tag enemies through walls, and I'm not sure I like that. It kinda makes stealth too easy. Like, come on, where's the tension in that? Half the fun in stealth games comes from not always knowing where enemies are. You gotta actually listen, pay attention, and move carefully. That's what makes games like Splinter Cell and Hitman so good. They let you tag enemies, sure, but only if you've seen them first. No X-ray vision nonsense. In a huge open world, that balance is important. It keeps things from feeling frustrating while still making you stay on edge. With Shadows, the increased challenge in stealth was such a breath of fresh air. This one change could have made it even better, really pushing that methodical, calculated approach. That said, as someone who lives for stealth games and originally got into Assassin's Creed for the sneaky assassin vibes, I actually feel heard for once. Like, Ubisoft finally listened. The improvements and new mechanics in Shadows actually make it feel like a stealth game again. Am I still salty about social stealth not being here? Yeah, a bit. I think it could have worked if they implemented it right, but honestly, there are so many other good additions that it kinda makes up for it. Ubisoft, please, I beg, don't make this a one-and-done thing. This series has a terrible habit of adding great mechanics and then straight-up abandoning them next game. Unity fans, we're still not over it. If the next AC game ditches all this progress, the light and shadow mechanics, prone movement, smarter AI, I swear I'm gonna lose it. Like, it should be common sense to keep improving on what works, right? But let's be real. Common sense isn't always so common at Ubisoft. Anyway, back to the bigger picture. My two must-have gameplay pillars in Assassin's Creed are stealth and parkour. The stealth fan in me? Satisfied. I feel seen. The parkour fan in me? I feel neglected. Abandoned. Like the forgotten middle child. But before I go absolutely feral on Ubisoft for butchering parkour, let's at least give credit where it's due. First off, I do like how fast and agile Nawe feels. Quebec really leans into that speed and agility in Nawe's animations, and finally, she actually feels fast. Like, remember when Ubisoft Bordeaux was hyping up Basim in Mirage, saying he'd be one of the fastest and most agile assassins ever? Yeah, well, he was fast compared to Eivor, but let's be real, that's not a high bar. Nawe, she actually moves like an assassin should. I wish there was more depth and complexity in her movement to match that speed, but at least she's not clunky and sluggish like a Viking. That would have killed the whole shinobi fantasy they're going for. One thing I do appreciate is how much smoother the parkour down mechanic is. I lost count of how many times I used it. Mirage and Valhalla technically had this, but it was so inconsistent. Half the time you'd just crouch instead of actually moving down. Now it's on the dodge button, and it just works. Also, shout out to the grappling hook, it feels solid. It could be way better though, and you already know what I'm about to say. We need the manual jump button back. It's been 11 years since we could manually jump in an AC game. Like, why is this even a debate? Just bring it back already. And look, we all knew this was coming. Shadows is definitely going to get compared to Rise of the Ronin and Ghost of Tsushima. And you know what? They've got manual jump buttons. Shadows? The game that's supposed to be all about movement and parkour? No jump button. Like, how does that even make sense? You've got 3 games here, and the one that should be all about fluid parkour is missing the most basic of movement options. It's honestly wild. But anyway, back to the grappling hook. It's actually a decent addition. It feels more like a tool that extends the parkour system, not replaces it, unlike what we saw in Syndicate. I'm not gonna lie, I can't imagine scaling some of these massive castles without it. That's one part I can get behind. Now here's where the disappointment kicks in. When it comes to actual mechanics, the parkour system isn't all that different from what we've been working with since Origins. Yeah, there are new animations and things move a bit faster, and the parkour down mechanic is more consistent. But that's like slapping a fresh coat of paint on a rusty car. It might look nicer, but the engine's still not running smoothly. You can throw all the flips and fancy animations you want at it, but if you dig deeper into the mechanics of parkour in Shadows, you'll see it's still pretty shallow compared to what the series could have had. Just look at Unity fans still think it has the best parkour system, even though its mechanics were limited. Why? Because those animations were fire. But if you're someone who's really paid attention to parkour in this series, you'll see that this latest attempt is just more style than substance. And then there's the whole world design issue. The way RPGs are built just isn't great for parkour. The world is massive, with huge open spaces, and while that's great for exploration, it means the horse is the main mode of traversal now. Parkour used to be the core way to get around, and it had that engaging learning curve that made it so satisfying to master. Now, not so much. And that right there is the real problem. In the old games, parkour had depth. It had a skill ceiling. You could actually get better at it. The more you played, the more you started mapping out your routes ahead of time, getting comfortable with advanced moves, and just thinking about how to move through the environment. Now, you hop on a horse and ride through a massive open space with zero thought. There's nothing to improve, nothing to master. Just hold forward and go. That's why parkour in Shadows is basically only useful in cities. And yeah, Kyoto is big, but none of the cities actually feel like they were built for parkour. They don't have that handcrafted verticality and flow like Venice, Constantinople, Havana, Rome, Paris, or even Baghdad. They're just there. And if you're playing as Yasuke, forget it. Dude moves slower, can't reach higher ledges, doesn't have the flashy animations, and, get this, ropes literally break when he steps on them. Like, come on. We've been stuck with this parkour system for 8 years across 5 games, and it's barely changed since Origins. At this point, adding tiny fixes isn't helping. It needs to be scrapped. If Assassin's Creed ever wants parkour to matter again, they need to move on. All right, enough about parkour. Let's talk about combat. I've never been a huge fan of the RPG-style hitbox combat we've had since Origins. Personally, I think the counter-based system peaked with AC3 and Unity. That said, I'll admit that Shadows has the best version of RPG combat so far. I still prefer the parrying from Origins, but this time there's actual depth. For one, there are posture attacks now. Charged light and heavy attacks that you can mix into combos. That alone makes the combat more dynamic than what we've had before. But the real win? Enemy variety. There are 6 different factions, each with their own armor levels and fighting styles. Outlaws, weak and fragile but fight dirty and use tools. Ashigaru, the standard foot soldiers. Ronin, more skilled and unpredictable. Samurai, heavily armored and disciplined. Samurai Daisho, elite samurai with dual weapons. Guardians, the absolute tanks of the game. Combat has layers now, and that's a huge step up from previous RPG-style AC games. The biggest addition? Flurry attacks. These are combo attacks signaled by a light blue glint, instead of the usual red unblockables. You can't just block these, you either have to parry or dodge, but if you nail the parries, you'll put the enemy in a vulnerable state, shown by an orange glow, where you can deal massive damage. The sheer variety in human enemies makes fights way more engaging. You're not just up against the same sword dudes over and over. Different factions have different weapons, attack patterns, and strategies. And unlike the past few RPG AC games, there are no random animal or monster enemies here. No over-the-top fantasy creatures. No wild animal ambushes. Just pure, grounded combat. That fits the tone of Shadows perfectly. Shadows dials things way back from the over-the-top supernatural stuff we saw in Odyssey and Valhalla. No minotaurs, no massive wolves, no undead pharaohs. This time, it's all about heightened reality rather than full-blown fantasy. That's not to say it's completely realistic. Abilities still push the limits, like Naoi's no-fall damage skill, basically parkour god mode, or Yasuke launching enemies with his kicks like he's in Street Fighter. But unlike past games, you're not turning invisible, teleporting, or wielding magic weapons. It's a happy medium, more grounded than the RPG-era AC games, but not as strict as the classics. Another massive improvement over Odyssey? Combat actually feels impactful now. Attacks connect with real weight, armor breaks in a satisfying way, and combat finishers look brutal. There's still some damage sponge, especially with Naoi, but that's probably to reinforce her stealth-first playstyle. Shadows takes a better approach to dual protagonists than Syndicate, but it's still not perfect. Unlike Jacob and Evie, who played almost identically in Syndicate, Naoi and Yasuke feel completely distinct. Different strengths, weaknesses, and playstyles. Naoi excels in stealth and parkour, while Yasuke is a combat powerhouse. This means you actually have a reason to switch between them instead of just picking whichever looks cooler. That said, the balancing still feels a bit off. Naoi can engage with all 3 core Assassin's Creed gameplay pillars: stealth, parkour, and combat, even if she's weaker in combat. Yasuke, on the other hand, is basically locked out of 2/3 of the AC experience. He's slow, lacks a grappling hook, and stealth is almost completely inaccessible to him. That makes him feel one-dimensional, especially over a long playthrough. There's also the frustration of forced switching. Some loot is locked behind character-specific abilities, like Yasuke needing to move heavy objects. But since you can't switch characters in a restricted area, that means you have to leave, switch, and then go back in, killing the flow of gameplay. Similarly, Yasuke can't reach certain viewpoints or areas without Naoi's grappling hook, which can be frustrating if you want to play as him consistently. All right, after putting in the hours testing the mechanics, and really diving into AC Shadows, here's the final verdict. Is this the AC game I've been waiting for? Not really. Does it have some solid elements? Yeah, actually, the good. Stealth is the best it's been since Unity. The tools, mechanics, and AI actually make it fun and rewarding. Combat has depth. It's the best version of RPG-style AC combat, even if it's not my preferred style. Dual protagonists actually feel unique. Unlike Syndicate, Yasuke and Naoi play completely differently, which is a big improvement. Loot and build crafting are balanced, not overwhelming like Odyssey, but still allows for some customization. The mid. Parkour is solid, but still outdated. It works, but it's clear Ubisoft hasn't fully committed to bringing back the old system. Forced character switching can be annoying. If you want to 100% everything, you have to switch between Yasuke and Naoi in certain situations. Combat can feel repetitive. Yasuke's playstyle, while powerful, lacks variety over time. The bad. Parkour needs a full rework. It's been almost a decade and we're still dealing with the same limitations. Some mechanics feel restrictive. Certain areas require specific characters to access, which disrupts immersion. Enemy sponginess. Even though it's toned down compared to past RPG titles, some fights still drag on longer than they should. Final rating. If you're an OG AC fan looking for peak stealth and parkour, 7/10. If you enjoy the RPG AC style with deep combat and build crafting, 8/10. If you just want an open-world action game with some AC elements, 7.5/10. It's a solid game, but it still doesn't fully capture that classic Assassin's Creed experience. Ubisoft is clearly listening, but they haven't completely nailed the balance yet. Hopefully, this is a step towards something better. That's my take. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. If you found this helpful, drop a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll catch you in the next one.